Some time ago, I was walking through the sanctuary of my church, and I saw a young woman who was visiting. I went over to introduce myself to her, and she told me her name was Rachel. We had a exchange, a few pleasantries. How you doing? How'd you find out about the church? That sort of thing. I asked her that question expecting the typical answer. Well, I found it online, or I drove by it 100 times. Sometimes people say, I went to a wedding there. It is a beautiful place and it draws visitors every week. But what she said, it really startled me in a good way. She said, I've been on a spiritual journey for about a year. I was intrigued. I said, I'd love to hear more about that, but I had to go on and do the business of our worship together. So I said, let's talk after service. And sure enough, she shook my hand. But as those things go, there's crowds of people, and she kind of walked on out quickly. And I wondered if I'd see her again. Sure enough, she came back week after week. I'd see her. And the weeks that she wasn't there, she'd pop over and say, hey, I was out of town last weekend, but I'm really enjoying it here. I found out that she got plugged into an adult education class. And over time, I decided I really, really want to know her story. So I said, Rachel, can we grab a cup of coffee? And she told me a very detailed journey that started as a child growing up in a Southern Baptist home. I believe one of her parents served in a capacity at the church where they led the worship. But she said it was never anything that she took to. And apparently along the way, there was some hardship of faith and some real just negative feelings and experiences surrounding faith, the church, and Christians. But she had an event, an emotional event, a family event that took place in her life that really set her on a quest. She talks with me about it here in this episode of Complex Creatures. And I was enamored by how that quest wasn't just emotional, and it wasn't just aesthetic, it wasn't just brought on by sorrow, but it was brought on by those things, and it was wedded with the intellectual pursuit of knowing more. When I met her, she was reading history text by Tom Holland, the historian. She was looking at G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy and the Everlasting Man. She had been reading these texts with her boyfriend at the time, who she's now engaged to, and she started engaging me with questions about faith and theology and life and how to see the world. I've always been intrigued by her openness to what we were doing here in church. This past Advent, during December, I got to baptize her into Christ, and I saw the joy and warmth in her eyes and her family's eyes. I've always been intrigued, as I said. So I said, Rachel, can we sit down for a cup of coffee? I'd just like to hear your story. Complex Creatures is a podcast where we endeavor to look at all things spirituality from the purpose of also pairing that conversation with a question about the common good. Spirituality is often that thing that we add to our lives for personal development, but it really is a way that can help us build and shape a world that we want to live in. So stories are very important for us at Complex Creatures, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to hear a little bit of a person's story and journey. Over the time of this podcast, we're going to listen to other people's stories of maybe belief and stories of unbelief, but we're going to hear from people. Because how people navigate these things and these questions is deeply educational for us all. It can enlighten us all. It can teach us things about not just those folks, but our own selves. Join us today. Today, since Rachel is a member of our congregation, I'd just like to say Peachtree Christian Church is the sponsor that brings you Complex Creatures. Peachtree Christian Church is in Midtown Atlanta, Georgia. It's a historic congregation. This year it's celebrating its centennial anniversary, and long history of ministry. You can visit their website at peachtree.org. We're thankful for the congregation's support for making and telling stories like this. Please listen to my conversation with my friend Rachel. Rachel, it's good to be with you today. Can you tell me a little bit about your faith journey? You are someone who I know has recently been baptized, recently got engaged. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And when we met, you told me that you were on a bit of a spiritual journey. It was the first thing you really told me, and I got curious about you. and I've got to see you from afar, and we talked a few times. Tell me about where it all started. Like, what put you off on a spiritual? When you when you were before this journey started, you were not a person of committed religious devotion, correct?
Yeah, I think I would have called myself like an agnostic, really. I think it was just not something that was front and center in my daily life, not something that I felt like I needed, or felt was relevant to me at all.
But you did grow up in a family of faith.
I did. I grew up Southern Baptist.
When did you walk away or become an agnostic?
Probably somewhere around high school, and maybe even when I was a kid. I never felt like drawn to the altar at all as a kid. And then when I got into high school, I think I just completely rejected it, I would say. And I felt in college the same. So it was not part of my existence.
When you say call to the altar, you're talking about like the kind of tradition that invites you forward to make a decision.
Yes.
To become a committed follower of Jesus, or any other tradition of faith. Like you're making, this is your moment, and you never felt called to that.
I never. And I actually would really dislike that part of the Southern Baptist service at the end. I think they call it the invitation.
The invitation.
And I dreaded it every time because I would have all these weird feelings, and I didn't like it. So I never did.
Was it intellectual? Was it cultural? Did you have a problem? Like the reasons why people seem to be agnostic might be because of intellectual assent to faith. It might be emotional trauma. It could also be the hypocrisy of the church. Do you have any self-understanding about what was prohibiting you from making that choice?
I think it was a lot of it was the hypocrisy of the church, and the hypocrisy that I saw, maybe sometimes in my own family and things like that, that just really turned me off. And maybe that's not fair, right? And maybe that's just an excuse that I'm using, but that's how it felt.
You're born and raised in the South, the southeastern United States. We're here in Georgia. Actually, for those of you listening, I'm sitting at a coffee shop with Rachel at the High Museum, Woodruff Art Center in Midtown Atlanta, Georgia, at Refuge Coffee, which is cool because this is a coffee shop that its resources really do help the refugee community here in Atlanta. So anyway, that's just an aside to give you our beautiful spring day location. But so you're from here, you grew up here, but you spent time also in Europe, correct, with parents?
Yes.
What country were you in?
In Germany.
And that was in high school?
In high school, from 9th to 12th grade.
Did being in a European context challenge faith? Because we as American people of any religious faith tend to look at Europe as a little bit more secular than America.
I certainly think so. And I think it also made me start, and this was wrong, like I'll preface this by saying this was wrong. It made me see the South as very backwards, and it kind of shaped this very judgmental feeling that I had towards Christianity.
Wow. There is a unique experience that we have when we travel abroad or when we live abroad, right? It does expand our horizons. Sometimes it can give us distortions of back home, and sometimes it can clarify things.
Yes.
And you went through a lot of that.
Especially as a kid, right? It's like your very formative years, and that's all the inputs that you're getting, so it's tough.
Now let's get to your journey. Just what prompted you on this? It's a little over a year, would we say, this spiritual journey, or maybe a couple years?
Probably, let's see, it's 2020, a couple years.
What started it off for you?
So I really think I had just been on autopilot for so long, and I needed something to shake me out of that. And that was losing my grandmother. That was really, I had so much grief and so much pain, I didn't know where to put it. And I had never felt like that before. So that was very startling to me. And I just started reading and thinking. And
Your grandmother was really close.
Very close, yeah.
She was a person of faith?
Very much.
Was it her faith that made you start reaching out to read and think about issues of faith? Or just her loss? Like what I'm trying to say is, had she not been a person of faith, would you have been encouraged in your own heart to still start thinking?
That's a good question. I think it definitely had something to do with her and my other grandmother who had passed the year before. They were both very faithful and always talked to me about that and always prayed for me. So I do think it helped me feel connected to them during that time.
So what were you starting? I mean, where do you start that? I mean, you're in grief. And by the way, condolences still, because grief does not just go away. So you're in grief, and you said you started thinking and reading. What did you pick up? Did you have anywhere? Did you even know where to begin? I guess.
I didn't even know where to begin. I think I just started just going to churches on Sunday.
Would you like Google search, or do you see like that's when I drove by?
Search, and I would see places on the side of the street, and I would just go. And I really liked how it felt.
Okay.
And I was so surprised that I was getting a lot from the preaching and the messages. And that surprised me, because I didn't think that was a possibility for me. And just reading the Bible, I think Paul's story, like in particular, and
his conversion.
Yeah. And reading about other people who had crises of faith that, I think Galileo is a good one.
It's interesting being asked these sorts of questions, because the act of like looking back also is revelatory to us. So in some sense, we're asking you these things, and you might have been reflecting on it, but it also might be bringing some new thought.
Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of it is just something that I feel in my spirit too. So it's hard to even articulate it.
That's valuable. That's a valuable insight, because I think there's a 20th century Catholic theologian named Hans Urs von Balthasar, and man, he was brilliant. He wrote so much. I mean, like, if I had all of his systematic theological texts, they would fit like a whole shelf in my library. And he wrote this whole section called the Theological Aesthetics, that he wrote about how theology begins from the knees up. And in a lot of ways, he's writing in his kind of hyper Enlightenment kind of era milieu, where everything's rational, everyone's logical and intellectual, and you start with propositions and ideas and logic and rationality. And he's saying that no, like, theology begins for him in devotion on the knees, but then from the side of where it catches a man or a woman's heart, it starts with beauty. You arrest a man or a woman with beauty, and then you're more apt to open them up to experience or that which is beyond them, more so than by giving them a good argument or even a good ethical discourse. And that sort of flips over the order of things that was set in place by Immanuel Kant, who talked about, truth first, and then ethics second, and then beauty third. Hans Urs von Balthasar's project flips it over and says, well, let's talk about beauty. Let's talk about the aesthetic things that actually cause a deeper awareness in of us, a truth, rather than only intellect and cognitive thinking, right? And I think there's something about that. Like, even the most intelligent, rational people I know who have come to faith, there's always something that is beyond mere reason. Mere reason may have gotten them there, but there's something else that keeps them there. So it's all, we're whole selves, and all of it's important.
Yeah, they pair really well together.
Yeah.
Right? When you can have both, that's amazing.
I'm curious about what you said when you said that you started going to churches. You said you liked how you felt. What did you feel? I mean, any congregation that you went to, whatever it is, what was it that you liked, that you were feeling when you would come away from those services?
I felt comforted, I think. I felt like I was being given something that, I don't know, made me feel more motivated in my day-to-day during the week. Yeah, it just made me feel better. Just being a human. It made being a human feel a little more bearable.
That's a great testimony for the church. There's so many negative things that people can say about the church. Even Christians and churchgoers can get really frustrated by other people, which is the church. So to hear that, that's an encouraging thing to hear, that you felt motivated, you felt good about being a human. Another person that we both know says that church on Sunday is kind of like a tent pole in their life. It's something they can put there to get a little room for the rest.
Yeah, and I don't like not going. I don't like missing a Sunday, because then I just don't feel quite right during the week. If you would have told me that 10 years ago that I'm saying this right now, I would think that you're crazy, but yeah. It's a wonderful thing. And there's been ever since I've started like prayer and devotion and dedicating my life in this manner, I've just felt so many more things just kind of slide into place for me.
So you started going to these churches, and it started moving things in you. You're getting content from different teachers and pastors, and that's challenging the way you think. What do you start reading? You start reading things. I know you've talked to me about a few good books along the way.
Yes.
Any books, and then if you want to talk about them, that's great. But like, what were they doing in you? What kinds of stuff are you engaging?
So last year I read Dominion by Tom Holland, which is a huge book about how Christianity's influenced Western culture.
Tom Holland is, I think, still considers himself a bit of an agnostic, but he's a historian who a lot of Christians are really enamored with, because he's talking about the church historically and what Christianity, its ideas of what it's done for the Western civilization. Yeah. And it's a huge book, you said. How many pages do you think that is?
Over 1,000.
Yeah, it's a good doorstop.
It is. It is. And, you know, he kind of paints this really full picture of how, yes, obviously there's been negative things that happen because of, you know, the church throughout history, but there's also been so many wonderful little things that we take for granted and we don't even see because they're just so ingrained in our culture and the way we are in there because of Christianity. And that is beautiful to me.
Do you have anything in particular, like an example that really sticks out to you?
I think that the example that I always think of, and I don't know why, is the way that modern atheists, the way that they practice their atheism is so Christian in its output. And I think that's just very fascinating to me.
I'm familiar with that. That has been a powerful argument that people have taken from that book, that the very way that people who reject God are allowed to reject God is based on the premise, on the ideas that Christian theology has given to the world. Those ideas having to do everything with choice, everything to do with civility, everything, all these different things Tom Holland is arguing for has their origins for the Western world within the Judeo-Christian teachings. Even when people get upset about about social justice issues and criticizing, is like, well, the foundational arguments are, excuse me, are in the fact that humans are made in the image of God and the dignity of humanity. I've also heard them talk about even Marxism is a version of, starts with a version of seeing people as dignified, which before this teaching was not a prevalent teaching in the Roman civilization.
Yeah. There's this beautiful part at the end of that book where he talks about how Christianity is a faith built on a man who came to earth, died a death of a slave, and is meant to bring up the lowest in our society instead of the other way around. And I think we take that for granted.
Yeah, we really do. There's a way in which the water that we still swim in, at least in this country, is so influenced by Christianity. And yes, there are deistic influences. There are other modernist and Enlightenment influences that would not cohere to the Christian faith so well. There are other religious influences, but the water, the ether, the whatever's surrounding us, right? That's very, very, very inspired by Christianity.
And I really hope that it stays that way. You know, I worry that the culture will shift in another direction.
Well, see, now that's a phrase spoken from someone who's bought in. Now you bought in.
I'm fully bought in.
So along the way, you are going to churches and finding comfort in your grief, and it's providing sounds like it's almost providing some stability, like emotional, mental stability through your week. Start reading stuff. What else happens along this journey of yours? Like, were there high points? Were there low points? Were there interesting surprises along the way?
I mean, I think finding our church was a high point.
I'm so happy to hear that.
I'm very grateful for that. I think as you said, I've recently gotten engaged. I think dating and meeting a Christian man has been big for me, and we'll be marrying one. So That's another high point. I honestly can't think of a low point. I don't think
Oh, wow.
I don't think I haven't had one yet. I'm sure it will come.
In the journey. Well, I'm so happy though that things are contributing in your life right now to a greater level of flourishing. Now, I know that with your fiance, you've read some things together. Like along the way, he became a part of your spiritual journey. Like he introduced you to G.K. Chesterton in the book Orthodoxy. Is that correct?
I did read that.
What else? Anything else? Did you like it? What were your takeaways?
I had a hard time with it. The language is tough, I think, for me with that book. With my fiance, I would say it's more just participating in faith together, and I had never had anything like that before. And it's really beautiful being able to share that with somebody.
It was joyous on the day of your baptism to see him beaming out there with pride.
Yeah.
He was beaming with pride. So that was a beautiful thing. What are you reading now? Are there things you're reading right now?
I have just got this book at the suggestion of Mary Elizabeth Ellard.
So she's your Sunday school teacher, adult education teacher at our church, and she is, for those of you listening, this is a woman who's a full-time veterinarian who also has a great deal of training in theology and biblical studies. She's a fantastic teacher. People love her. Go ahead. What did she tell you to read?
F.F. Bruce,
Ah,
his book on Paul, because we were studying Paul and Romans actually, and Paul is just really one of a kind. I cannot imagine the task that he had, and I'm very interested in him and his life. So I've just started reading that. I haven't finished it. I haven't gotten very far into it actually, but that's what's next on my list.
and for someone like you who's gone through this journey, church background but never committed, then walked far from it spiritually, coming back to it freshly, and made your own decision as an adult. What are the prayer or spiritual practices that are meaningful to you? What do you naturally naturally drawn to? Which ones really shape you?
I like to listen. So I like to listen to people talk, like the conversation that we're having now on podcasts or telling their stories in books. There was a reason why I wanted to read Orthodoxy, was because he is talking about his own faith journey. That's basically, I think, what the book is about. But those kind of things really help me feel connected. I think fellowship with other
Sure.
people and Christians, like the going to Sunday school class and like learning in a group with people and hearing them come to these conclusions about like, what does this mean? What does by grace through faith? What do those things mean? I think that's very important. And I think prayer, just, a little every morning, just praying, like that's just sets your day off right.
The corporate study thing is something that we undervalue, I believe, in our world because we're perhaps individualistic. I don't know exactly why I think we undervalue it, but Bonhoeffer said somewhere, probably in Life Together, that the Christ in my brother is often stronger than the Christ that is in me. And there's something about the authority of Scripture not just being about how I understand it in my 21st century white American context, or, and you can get that, I can parse that out more narrowly and become very particular. There's something about reading with the generations, with the world church, right? And then there's something about reading with other people in a room and realizing that maybe the Spirit of God and the Christ in my brother, sister might speak to me freshly, show me something I didn't see, open my eyes. So I think about corporate study as like a thing we can do with people alive now, but we can also, depending on how we study, we can read with people of all times, and it can open up our imagination. So I think it's something that I'm glad you're a part of it, and I think that it's something that can really push us further. Perhaps if we even found ourselves in settings with people who are not just like us, it would be more beneficial for the faith. It's actually why I tell people to go to church. If you really went to church and gave yourself to it, even when it frustrated you or the people there annoyed you, you would find yourself like willfully joining in fellowship or community with people who you would not naturally choose to be friends with. Some of them, you may be surprised that you really, really love them and like them. Some of them, you may find that there's nothing about this person that you really, really, really like, but you're there with them and you're encouraged to pass the peace with them, to forgive them, to confess to and with them. And then you find if you do all this, you start becoming more of a real human being, getting outside of yourself a little bit more.
Yes.
You know? I don't know. It's just me
Getting
waxing.
outside of yourself is the big one.
Yeah.
I think on a day-to-day basis, if you just work a corporate job, go home, like, go to the gym, cook dinner, you're thinking about yourself pretty much all the time.
That's the description of a modern day life, right? Like here you are living in Atlanta, and you could just easily, if you wanted
Yeah.
to, you could be pretty isolated in the middle of the city where we are right now. Do you find it actually hard right now to just find new relationships out in the world, or is it easy for you? I find it hard.
I think I've kind of always found it hard.
Did you?
Yeah, I've been pretty selective, and I don't mind spending time alone. So the practice of going to church, like that, passing the peace, like that's tough for me.
That is
you know?
tough. Okay, yeah.
I think that's tough for a lot of people, but I do it, and it makes me more comfortable in social settings overall.
Yeah, there are people, the more introverts among us find it difficult, and then the extroverts, they think it's not passing the peace. It's time to talk about sports for the weekend and what they're going to have for lunch and everything else, right?
Yeah.
Well, how do you feel about where this journey is leading you next? Like, do you have any sense that God is like laying on your heart a heart for something in the world? Like sometimes when we find ourselves growing in our faith, we start picking up areas of service or passions. I don't know. Is that happening in your walk right now?
Yeah, I think that's kind of always been there for me. I've always felt like I need to do a bit more. A couple of weeks ago, I went to do food service for the homeless here in Atlanta, and I don't know. There's so much need, and it would be great to find an outlet like that. I wouldn't say that I've been particularly called to anything yet, but I do still think I'm still maybe on the tail end of the very like individualistic part of like getting to church, getting baptized, getting there, and then maybe it's time for me to turn outward.
Oh.
Well,
by the way, what day were you baptized?
December 15th.
December 15th. I knew it was in Advent. I just didn't know if you knew the date. What was that like for you? Like, I guess, was it a moment of excitement, or was it a blur because you're in front of a bunch of people,
It was one of those things where I would wait every week because remember, I'm coming from Southern Baptist, and I have this association with the end of service, like, okay, am I ready to like get saved? Am I ready yet? So at the end of service every week, I'm thinking that, and I'm waiting for the feeling. Because for some reason, I think it just needs to be this feeling. And I can't remember, it was one Sunday I was just sitting there, and I just felt like, okay, that gross feeling that I had as a kid, that feeling of rejection is like gone. And I'm like, I want to do this. And I did it like 2 weeks later on the 15th, and it felt incredible.
What do you think it is between when you were a kid and now that changed? What's the gross feeling? Like, was it, I don't know, you may not know, but like, I think sometimes perspective helps in our life. And then I think sometimes setting and delivery helps. Sometimes the way we present faith is very culturally bound. Sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense to us, the way we think about using our words. I mean, so there could be a lot of different things that kind of were in the way of it before.
I wish I knew. I wish I knew, because if I could pinpoint what the change was, that would be very helpful to me, but I don't know. Like I said, I can't. I try to like articulate it and intellectualize it, and I can't.
Yeah.
I wish I could.
It's okay.
It must have been something, but I don't know. Maybe I'll pray on that because I don't know.
Well, I don't think you necessarily have to know either. It's like, it took as long as it needed to take, right?
It was just God's timing.
Or sometimes that journey that we take, the pilgrim, sometimes we're on a journey where we only move 2 inches, but it's light years away. I feel like that's so true of my spiritual pursuit in life. Like, I have come so far, but it looks like I've moved very little. Everything that's changed is really internal. It's me that's changed. I've encountered this thing differently. I have a whole list of scars and experiences and joys and everything else that has made me either more open and available or close me off,
I think if you ask the people that know me the best, like I think that most of them would say that I'm a much kinder person, a much more accepting person than I was 5 years ago. And I don't know exactly when that happened, but it has. And I'm so happy. And I never want to go back to the way things were before.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. I think it's a helpful conversation to have, because the point of this, podcast really is to talk about spiritual issues, how they relate to the common good, but so much of it is hearing people's stories and experiences, because, as you say, hearing from other people can be helpful to us in our own journeys. But also there's this other little thread of what I'm trying to do in these conversations, and that is try to think about ways that we engage belief, spiritual pursuit. Simply put, the way we try to engage God in a world that's increasingly secular, and at least it's changing in the way people and negotiate the things of the sacred worth in their life. And as someone who's very interested in talking to folks about it, just hearing the story and hearing how they've come to is important, because we don't all do it the same way. And there might be better ways to call people from the darkness and into light. There might be better ways to come walk alongside of people who are hurting, and part of that is part of my interest is here as well. So it's good to hear your story. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think I'll just say this, the last thing. There's no right way to do it. I think a lot of people that I grew up around just became saved when they were 10 or 11, and then were just really good Christians forever. And it helps me to hear from other people that have had different stories, and it's okay, and there's no right way.
That's a good word to end on. Thank you for letting me be part of your journey.
Thank you.
Thank you.